to Shoulder to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War. I am Will Selber, a retired Middle East Foreign Area officer, and I am joined by my BFF forever, Kate K. Kate, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm super excited to be hosting this podcast with you.
So am I. We are very excited to provide you with a little introduction before we delve into our first episode. So I am Will. I spent 4.5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan the last year, and that is when me and Kate K kind of bumped into each other. And, we met during the whole Afghan evacuation process, but that is a kind of a background about me. I spent a lot of time downrange, 3 years in Afghanistan.
I like that you skipped over the 20 plus years in the Air Force in general.
So yeah, I also did 20 plus years in the Air Force. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. It's fancy.
Yeah.
And I am Kate Kovarvik, more commonly known by my peers as Kate K. Currently, I am an attorney working in the field of veterans law, which means that this is the perfect time to let you guys know that I am only participating in this podcast in a personal capacity. So any opinions that are shared reflect only my own personal opinions and not that of my employer, the federal government. Please, thank you. I appreciate the respect. And exactly like what Will said, we met about 2.5 years ago after Afghanistan fell in August of 2021. I am a civilian. And so because I work with veterans so closely, I saw how hurt they were by the withdrawal and how it was carried out and how many of our Afghan military allies were left behind. And because I care so deeply about veterans, I felt like I needed to get involved. So over the course of 2 years, I first started doing communications work for one of the nonprofits who were helping with the evacuation and resettlement work. At that point, we sort of realized that the mental health needs of volunteers were far greater than we could have anticipated. So then I went to a new role as the Director of Resilience Programming for the Afghan EVAC Coalition, which is a role that I'm no longer in. And during that time, I also took on casework for particularly difficult or at-risk cases, including some of the female protesters or sick children. And so that is how I first came to get to know my favorite friend, Will.
It has been quite a history between us. We worked together for quite a while and we had never even met. So it wasn't until a couple of years ago that we actually met in the flesh. And it has been quite a journey. When we talk about, what this podcast hopes to be is we hope to provide a space for people to talk about the last 20 years or so. Yeah. We want to talk about the global war on terrorism, the long war, my preferred name for it. But from every vantage point, right? I don't want it to be just about the military. The U.S. military. I want to hear from all the different perspectives, not just on Afghanistan, but from Iraq to Syria and everything in between, from civilians, all of that. And I think, our hope is that by doing that, people can learn about what went wrong, and that we have honest conversations about this war and these wars and what they did to us.
Yeah, we really just want to provide a space for people to understand how conflict like this war can sort of seep into anyone's lives, right? So it's not just the people who are serving in the military, but the families who they leave behind or the volunteers who stepped in to help with the withdrawal. Really what we're hoping to do is just offer people a safe space to share their stories with the rest of the world. So that's what you can expect from this podcast. We're going to have a really broad range of guests come on, people that we volunteered with, people who have been impacted in any sort of ways, just an opportunity for them to come and to share their stories. There will also likely be a little bit of dark humor in there. A lot. Yeah, we've got a lot of that military humor going on. So please know that you need to expect that if you are a part of that podcast.
Yes, you should realize that there's probably going to be cursing.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think people should realize that. Probably not a podcast you want to blare out with your children around. Some of the stories
Really dark, yep.
Can get dark. We're going to talk about war and what it's really like.
Yep.
Because euphemisms on war, they just hide the truth from what's really going on. And I would rather all of us make informed decisions about our wars in the future by really starting to understand the wars that were just fought, because that way at least we can start to understand what we're getting ourselves into.
Yeah, that is the whole point. We want people to be able to come on and to speak with candor. With that, we do have one rule in mind, whether it is for our guests, for ourselves, or for anybody writing in. And that one primary rule we have is dissent with respect. And really what we mean by that is whoever comes on, we want them to feel safe to share their opinions or their points of view, but it needs to be offered in a respectful way. And so as the host of this podcast, we do reserve the right to shut down any line of conversation that doesn't abide by that guideline.
What she said, multiply that by like 100.
Yep.
I don't want to mess with her. She tells me what to do, and I just try to execute.
We want to be careful with the topics, and also what Will had mentioned. It's not just that we're talking about war. This is going to be really heavy on mental health, just because the two really are more related than I think a lot of people understand. Those are really heavy topics, and so we'll try to give trigger warnings where we can. But please understand that the topics that we will discuss will get heavy, probably very often.
Yes. We are looking forward to communicating with you. If you feel like maybe that you would want to be on the show or that you have something to tell, we'll provide an email. Just understand, please, once we open that up, that we both have separate lives. We're not, getting paid for this. So it might take us a little while to get our feet underneath us to be able to respond in such a manner.
Speaking of that, Will, do you want to talk about our first episode and getting our feet underneath us?
Yeah, exactly. So, you're about to hear a great episode by Lieutenant General. We had a great conversation with Lieutenant General Sami Sadat and Brigadier General Khoshal Sadat last week. But some of them were overseas. The connection didn't really take all that well. But we were able to, figure it out. And now we have a finished product. So I would just say bear with us as we try to get our feet underneath us. We're well-intentioned, but not well-polished.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think that should be our tagline.
That was Kate K's. Kate K, that's tagline Kate. And I was like, because this is like the third or fourth time we've done this, right?
It's true.
Yeah.
That's okay. We appreciate everybody's patience with us. We decided that we were going to put out last week's podcast, regardless of some of the technical difficulties, because the actual content of the conversation was really, really important. And we are very close with both of the people who we had on as guests, and we want to show respect to their time and all of the information that they came to discuss with us. So we appreciate everybody's patience. And more than that, on a bigger scale, we're so, so grateful that you guys are here with us. Will retired from the military fairly recently, and this podcast is something that's so close to his heart. And as it's just something that veterans, I think in particular, are really going to take hold to. So we're so grateful for your graciousness. We're so grateful for your attention. And we really are so, so excited to be working with you.
Thank you so much. And we hope you enjoy the episode.
You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shoulder to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War, where we tell stories to help bridge the civil gap. I am one of your co-hosts, Will Sulver, and riding shotgun. As always, my BFF forever, the lovely, the talented Kate K. Kate, how are you doing today?
I am so psyched about today's episode, and especially the guests that we have. I think that they're going to have a lot to say that people will want to listen to.
We brought out our heavy hitters right off the bat. We like to start strong here, set high expectations here on Shoulder to Shoulder. So without further ado, before I get started, Kate K and I wanted to thank Slade Cleaves for allowing us to use this song, which you would hear in the intro, Still Fighting the War. He did no charge, and we really greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much, sir, for allowing us to use your wonderful song, Still Fighting the War, which is one of my favorites. All right, so we are excited to kick off this podcast with two of my personal heroes. First, Lieutenant General Sami Sadat. Sami was the former commander of the Afghan National Army Special Operations Corps and the 215th Corps that was based in Helmand Province, and that's in southern Afghanistan right next to Kandahar. He also served inside of the National Directorate of Security, NDS, which was the Afghan Republic's premier intelligence service. He is a graduate of the United Kingdom's Joint Service Command and Staff College at the Defense Academy, and I'm very jealous of that fact. He's also trained at the Polish Defense Academy and NATO's Military Academy. He also holds an MA in Strategic Management and Leadership from the UK Charter Management Institute. Currently, General Sadat is the chairman of the Afghanistan United Front, a political organization that is leading an opposition against the Taliban. He is joined by Brigadier General Khoshal Sadat, who served for 17 years in the Afghan Special Forces. During his distinguished career in the Afghan National Army, he held multiple positions, including as Afghanistan Deputy Minister for Security, where he commanded over 115,000 police and security forces across the nation. In 2010, he also served as aide-de-camp to the overall commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan, General Stanley McChrystal. He is a graduate of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, United Kingdom, and the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, which is right down the road from me, in beautiful, lovely Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Gentlemen, it is an absolute honor to have both of you on our very first episode of Shoulder to Shoulder. Welcome.
Oof.
Thank you. Congratulations.
I know.
Thank you. My brother Will's initiative, Shoulder to Shoulder, Shana Bashana.
Yep.
It reminds us about memories of our joint war against terrorism. And Will, you never cease to surprise me. I didn't know what you will do next, but this is right a couple of months after your retirement, and you hit us back with this. This is wonderful. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate you coming. Coach, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks, Will. Just I echo what Sami said. You know, you've always amazed us throughout your career, and this is an honor.
Yeah, my wife. So I'm currently filming in my studio, which is the basement of my house, where my wife has banished me. So I figured that every once in a while she lets me come up for air and feed, and so I might as well do something constructive of my time down here in the basement.
Gotta keep yourself busy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to talk to both of y'all a little bit about your careers. And, for a lot of Americans, they don't understand a lot about the Afghan National Army. They kind of, when I start talking to them about it, they're like, well, what is that? What did they actually do? What does that actually mean? So maybe if you could just kind of, both of y'all, if y'all could answer this question, it'd be great. What was the turning point, or what made you want to join the Afghan National Army?
You want to start, Kosh?
Sure. I joined because I needed a job, to be honest.
Boom.
This was in 2000 this was early 2003. I was already an interpreter with the NATO forces, and they had started the training. At that time, we weren't really organized as Army or police or NDS. They were small elements, but we were not as organized as we were later on. And we had started a small counter-narcotics unit that the unit was selecting young, physically fit, educated individuals. And it started very small. It was about 60 individuals. And the UK government had funded it and started that initiative. So I wanted to be part of that team and also kind of have a career, but never really thought beyond that. I just wanted to be part of a team. It didn't look at the greater service, or because we were already we had already gone past so many wars and issues. So for me, it was a team, being part of a team, and a job initially.
It's a good reason. How about you, Sami?
So I think Kosh is a little bit modest. Kosh and I both come from a career military family. Kosh's father was a fighter jet pilot whose aircraft was shot down, and Kosh actually grew up very young without a father. My father was in the military as well, and both of them, unfortunately, suffered the defeat at the hands of extremists. At the time, these were the Mujahideen and the extreme elements in Afghanistan. So from very young childhood, I had this idea that we need to raise and defeat this. This is not right, and everything we see is wrong. So that became a motive. However, when the Taliban took over in the 90s, I was enrolled in a local religious madrasa. I was brainwashed, and I started liking what I was seeing. My father at the time was in the resistance fighting against the Taliban. Of course, he was away from our home for 3 years. He was ultimately captured and put in jail, and he managed to escape with a couple of his friends from the prison in Kandahar. And when he did, they came to our house, the Taliban, searching for him, and then they captured me and put me in jail. So I was 14 years old. Then in the prison, as I was going through this process of becoming an extremist Taliban at the time, what I saw changed my mind completely, and it changed me as a person up until today. And what I saw, the torture, the beating, and the misbehavior with the kids. I was in the miners' cell, and a couple of miners died under the Taliban beating and the deprivation from sleep, and the way they were teaching us. At the time, we were taught by Egyptian teachers who learned a little bit of Pashto. Some of them were actually using Pashtun translators. Later, I found out these would be Al-Qaeda members who were indoctrinating the Afghans. But on the contrary, when I walked out of the prison, I wanted to become a fighter like a one-man or two-man team and just go around and kill the Taliban. But then luck handed us to us, and then the Americans came. My father came back, and then we kind of found ourselves in, liking to join, and I joined the service.
Yeah.
That's an interesting backstory, Sami. I actually didn't know that was your history. And it's interesting to me that you were so young when you started to realize what the difference was between what the Taliban wanted from you and what the resistance would have wanted from you, because kids are so susceptible, right? That's why they try to indoctrinate them so early. And I find it really interesting. I think it says things about your character and your belief that even at that young age, you were sort of able to understand, no, this is not what I want for myself and also for the future of my country.
That's true. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, people like myself and Kosh, we have to grow very fast, and we have to take responsibility. As you know, our fathers never were around. They were always fighting, or they were not at home. So you have to take certain responsibility. And then there's tough streets growing up, and then politics change, and everything kind of influences you. So we had to really man up at the much earlier age that you would in America.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things for Americans to understand is that Afghanistan has been at war for a long time. And, when you're talking about the resistance, for a lot of Americans, they won't know exactly that time period. So I'm thinking, are you talking about after the Soviets left the resistance to the Taliban's rule in 96, or even before that, where your family was involved in, both of y'all?
So the term resistance in our modern history came in 1996 when the Taliban captured Kabul.
Okay.
And the government at the time, led by Professor Rabbani, moved into northern Afghanistan, and then they termed their fight as a resistance to the Taliban. So that is resistance number one. And resistance number two is now about to begin against the Taliban again. Other wars, like the war against the Russians, was called the War for Freedom. The war against the British was called War of Independence. So these are different terms used in our history.
One of the things that we really wanted to focus on is why you think that international cooperation is so important to Afghanistan's growth. And so my question, I think a lot of people here don't understand how closely U.S. really worked with Afghanistan over the past 20 years. They look at these relationships between people like you and Will. They don't necessarily understand why it's so important. And so I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about what was it like working with the U.S. during the past 20 years? What were those relationships like for you, and why was it so important that they support you?
I'll let Kosh answer that question. He was always in the military with his U.S. brothers. I spent much time in the intelligence. We had later in my career, I started working with the U.S. military.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's going back from 2001 or 2002 onwards. It always been it had always the relationship with the U.S. had always evolved to a different level or different ways. I remember in early days we weren't really as looked at as partners. We were mostly local force to operate alongside the U.S. with minimum training, minimum oversight, or minimum support. Still carried the old AK-47 with crappy uniform and nothing really modern to do the missions. But then, as the violence grew in the country, the U.S. realized, look, we should have a force that is able to go with us on operations. And then there was a little bit more reliance on us. More resources were added to the training and equipment, and also, but still, I was 19 years old when I started, and so we weren't seen as a partner that you could sit together and plan an operation or go do something. All it was is a bunch of Americans come over. Hey, get your team. Let's go. We're going to this area. We're doing this. We didn't know what stake we had in that operation. I'm being very, very, very frank here. And then slowly, as the U.S. realized that, look, this is not just an American war fought on Afghan terrain. We've got to get these Afghan guys take responsibility for their own country. And to be fair, we did not have, and this is not to be critical of the past, but I mean we didn't have the Afghan National Army and police, of course, had more issues. Yeah. As I mentioned, the unit that I was part of, we weren't really part of the army or police. We didn't know where to put us because we were just a small kind of narcotics unit, but then according to Constitution, they put us into to part of the MOI. So I was always critical of both organizations, Army and police, and proud of some of what they were doing.
Of course.
So it slowly grew as the policy was to let's give more responsibility to the Afghan forces to do the fight, and also let's put more effort on education and training. So our relationship kind of evolved year by year. I wouldn't say year by year, but every few years. Will knows pretty well. He's been there many times during his time, and he could tell us, in 2010, how was it with you?
Yeah. So my first time, 2008, I was on a provincial reconstruction team in Kapisa province, and most of my interaction was with the Afghan police. With a district chief of police, which is basically, for the listeners, that's like a county police chief or sheriff or something like that. And then I had an A&A company that was also with us. And so I came from doing 7 months in Baghdad in 2006, training with the Iraqi police. And give me the Afghan police every day and twice on Sunday is what I always told people. Like, I was like, I get it that like there needs to be some professionalism and there needs to be some improvement here, but compared to what? Like, compared to the fact that they just started. When I was in Baghdad, all those Iraqi policemen, they were trying to kill me. They were all Jaish al-Mahdi, Muqtada al-Sadr's insurgent group, which had infiltrated the Ministry of Interior. So I was always much higher on the Afghan security forces because I had the experience of seeing the other side. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is that, and this is when I try to explain the Afghan National Security Forces, this is what I kind of say to people, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. There was a lot of the ANASOC, the National Mission Unit, which was like the SWAT teams for people that aren't aware from the MOI, the Afghan Air Force, all of these like elite units, they were very good. I mean, considering how long they had just stood up. And so I just would, and I think that a lot of the bad press was because of some of the other units below, right? That it had like ghost soldiers and stuff like that, that had corruption issues and stuff like that. but the premier units inside the Afghan National Security Forces were very good. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think you are right. I think our special forces community, to include the air wing, the SWAT teams and the counter narcotics and the MOD special forces were one of the best in our region. I don't think any of our neighbors, by comparison, had even close to what we have had. The trouble we see in the bad press, and I think it's more evident today, Will. This morning, Jaish al-Adl, an Iranian Taliban affiliate, attacked 4 checkpoints, and they overrun an IRGC base, and they took tons of ammunition. And from this morning, Iranian time until now, which is early evening, they still couldn't put up these fighters, and they're still fighting. There was several attacks in Pakistan by the TTP that the Pakistani army is crumbling in the outer areas, and these ISKP fighters are trained in Afghanistan, and now they attacked Moscow. They have attacked several other of our regional countries, and nobody is as effective as we were in the past. This also shows that what we were up against. Well, we were up against a lot of terrorist organizations, and this is, Afghanistan, Southeast Asia is a very terrorist-rich area. So Afghan army and Afghan special forces with the U.S. forces were really up against several, terrorist organizations with very sophisticated, tradecraft and tactics, backed by a couple of countries in that part of the world, and so
Iran and Pakistan.
That's right, and
let's call him out. Who has 2 thumbs and hates Pakistan? This guy right here. So let's go ahead. It's our podcast. We can say what we want to. It's okay.
Coming out strong. I support it.
Thank you. So I think that shows the toll that we were taking and the kind of exhaustion we were going through. And now the cat is out of the bag, and nobody can control that. I mean, in next year, this time, Iran and Pakistan would be wishing that they didn't support the Taliban, and they had the Americans in Afghanistan, and they had the Afghan army fighting these terrorists, because we grew so good at fighting these terrorist organizations. And compare with the cost of what our neighbors are now fighting these terrorists and what we were fighting, the cost was much smaller in terms of the human casualty was high. In terms of material cost, it was much more smaller. The world is going to pay a lot more than we have paid for fighting terrorism.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think, too, that's something that's been so frustrating for me as I got involved in this work over the last 2 years, is that a lot of people, and this is, it's so painful, but they talk about how Americans were going in there to save Afghanistan. And I don't think that that's what it was. Like, Afghanistan has a very capable military force and people like you two who are, fighting for the future of your country. It's not about saving, it's about cooperation and support. The situation in Afghanistan, as in many other places, it's really nuanced and it's really complex. And I think that a lot of people don't quite understand that. They think that the U.S. went in there 20 years ago. We were supposed to save a nation. We didn't, and then we left. And I think it's just, that doesn't give enough credit to men and women like you who are putting in the actual work to set up, a better foundation for a better future for your country. It's not about saving. It's just about cooperation and doing what's right.
Well, to be honest, if U.S. came in 2001 to take revenge of those who perpetrated 9/11, we know more than 90% of those guys were in Pakistan and some in Iran, maybe Middle East as well. Afghanistan was obviously used, just as it is right now, being used as a planning and training ground for terrorist attacks. Now, the U.S., we put all of our hearts and minds and bodies, basically, the entire nation, to a idea of democracy, idea of having freedom. Of course, we enjoyed that life, but we also, Sami and us and many others, have paid our, did our duty for that. Now, that whether the U.S. when the U.S. departure was, the way they did and what the decision they made, that's a different subject, and that's a different Pandora's box that we can open later in the time. But
Let's do it.
I want to add something what Sami mentioned, regarding these attacks. It's amazing now sitting 10,000 miles away, watching Pakistan respond to attacks, Iran respond, Moscow respond to these attacks. I mean, we sucked as well. We would have 18 hours of fun. We learned the hard way. The NMUs, the National Mission Units, the Commandos, the KKAs, the NDS strike units that work with the intelligence community. Yeah. We took a lot of casualties, but we learned it at the end. By the end, we were really. I remember Sami was in Helmand in the last days. I know Will used to talk to him quite a bit, and I asked Sami, "How you doing?" And he answered me back. He's having a cigar in his hand. He said, "Brother," he's like, "Brother, I have 20. I'm squeezing 26 hours out of the Scan Eagle, which is the
yeah.
Which I don't know how he was doing." And he said, if one Talib comes, one dies. If 1,000 comes, 1,000 dies.
There you go.
That's it. So we learned the trick. We learned the technique. We learned the targeting cycle of find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze. The targeting cycle. Yep. What the way the Americans were, because we learned it from the best. And it's just, now that we see Pakistanis and Iranians respond, this is just a start.
Yes, of course.
We have an expression. Just raise your cup of chai.
Right. No. So look, I mean, I had this conversation with somebody the other day. I was, weekly I would have talks with the Pakistani defense attaché because that was part of my job, right? And I hated them, right? Because he just lied to me all the time, right? And I knew he was lying, and he knew he was lying to me. A little dance we did, and the last time I met with him, I shook hands. I said, "Well, good luck," and I pulled him in, and I said, "I hope you know what you've done because you're going to pay for it in the end." And they are. I mean, we have now hit the point in this little play, as you guys know, that the Pakistani military is conducting cross-border operations against the Taliban because the Taliban can't control the terrorist groups that they allow as sanctuary in their country. So, I mean, that's a direct result of some of the policy choices that we've made.
Actually, not only the Taliban are not controlling the TTP, but actually Taliban are supporting the TTP. Mm-hmm. They have learned from Pakistanis how to evade and completely deny any involvement. When Khosh and I watched the Taliban, how they respond into the Pakistani accusation, how they support the insurgency of the TTP, the Baluchis, this and that, it is exactly the copycat they have learned from ISI. They have reverse engineered it, and now they're using the same tactic against the Pakistanis. Pakistan made a huge mistake by attacking Afghan territory with jet fighters, because now even the Taliban who were hesitant to support TTP, now everybody supports TTP. Al-Qaeda has put their best engineers, their best advisors into the ranks of the TTP, and they're preparing huge trucks of explosives. Like we're talking about 10 tons of explosives that will be used in Pakistan. It breaks my heart, and we feel horrible for what is happening. But the blame goes to the Pakistani military. These were the ones, they did it. And they will never stop, Will. Today, they're using ISKP exactly as they used the Taliban. They gave ISKP the same locations as they did for Al-Qaeda. They're maintaining contact. They're giving them target packages to go inside Afghanistan and do it. And ISKP tomorrow will turn against Pakistan as well. So I don't understand based on what calculation, what algorithm, and what logic do they work. It's
short-term thinking. Short-term thinking for sure. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about, and we kind of brought it up earlier about, what did you feel like when the U.S. announced, the withdrawal date? I know that this was, it wasn't just President Biden coming out and saying we're going to leave at this point in time, right? So you saw, and so did I was there the last year, basically from the beginning of the Doha talks until the Biden administration, what was the thinking going on? Did you know that this was going to come out this way, that we were going to actually withdraw, or did you have any hope that the Doha Agreement would produce any type of tangible results?
I think, brother, the Doha Agreement and the withdrawal is two different things.
Okay.
And we have to differentiate it, because the Doha Agreement was a conditional-based agreement. All the conditions were broken. So that meant the Americans would stay and continue to fight. Not only stay, but continue to fight. Staying without fighting was not beneficial to us anyway. Like, the Doha Agreement put the conditions on. We would hope that President Biden comes. He's been in the system for too long. He will listen to his generals and he will reverse the agreement, or at least go after the Taliban, or support the Afghan forces to go after them. Unfortunately, it was a big surprise for us that President Biden announced the withdrawal. It was a surprise across the government. Now, phase two, after the announcement of the withdrawal, I didn't think we will fall apart. I thought that we will lose territory, but we will continue to fight. In a way, it was a chance for us to fight on our own and defeat the Taliban and show that we can defeat you without the Americans, at least in my part of where I was in charge. But Kosh was in the capital, so he knows more about. I was completely blindfolded with what I was doing on the ground, so I didn't take notice of the other corps, and I didn't have that kind of a critical insight to what would have happened. And perhaps also I was in denial. Maybe I didn't want to know that we are falling apart.
Yeah.
I mean, I just have to say, I watched Retrograde in preparation to talk to the two of you. And I remember that there were a couple of scenes at that time around May 2021, Sami, where you're talking to some of the U.S. forces that had been working with you. And you seemed so sure that we weren't just going to leave as quickly and abruptly and painfully as we did. You seemed really sure of yourself. And just as a viewer, so somebody who wasn't a part of it at that point, I remember thinking, like, that's what international cooperation is supposed to be. Like, the United States should have given the Afghan army such certainty that we weren't going to abandon them, that what you felt was correct. And instead, we left very quickly and without a lot of structure or support. And so I'm just going to go ahead and ask the big question. I'm wondering what you guys feel now about the U.S. involvement and the way that we left.
Yeah, let me add to a couple of things. Number one, the U.S. military, you got to differentiate U.S. capabilities as well. The conventional armed forces or U.S. Army, Marines, yes, the policy had changed. They needed to be focused on China, Asia, any other countries. And I understand they've been exhausted. They were working in Afghanistan for almost 20 years. But the mission, the combat mission had already shifted to the Afghan forces. So we had minimum, maybe some tier one special operators that would go after high-level Al-Qaeda or ISIS leaders. Other than that, we were doing the fight. The Air Force, as Will knows very well, had developed the capabilities. The intelligence units of Afghan departments with built capabilities, signal intelligence, ISR, special operation units. And it makes me kind of reflect back, and I thought, a lot. I mean, the U.S. done a lot for us. Yeah. What they couldn't do is bring a decent political system for our own country and where it could kind of hold us together. Yeah. So we had everything in a sense of the way we were doing, but the U.S. decided in 2020 to do two things. 2020, number one, it pressured us, the politics, the Afghan government, to stop offensive operations. Yes. That handcuffed us. 100%. Number two, stop supplying of critical equipment, such as laser-guided bombs, ammunition. Heck, we needed you probably know, devil's in the details. Your laser and your rifle and some of the NVGs needed not the double A's, the kind of CR123, whatever it's called. It's a little thick battery. We ran out of that, so we couldn't even use our lasers on the rifles. So think about that. So almost entirely and we couldn't find it in the region. And they couldn't even Pakistan, Iran, nowhere you could find it. You could get it in Walmart here, but we couldn't get it. And seriously, if you go there, there's AA, AAA for the remote control, and there's little thick that little battery that you can put in your laser. We couldn't get it because to use. So that's what happened. And then obviously there's we also believe, and we were told. I mean, I was in Kabul. I'm speaking to some of the advisors in the headquarters and the intelligence community, and they told us, it's like, hey, we'll be okay. The troops are going to leave. We're going to be here, as in the advisors and so on. We'll make sure you get the supplies. We can fight, and we were prepared to fight. You know, it's the Taliban have been glorified, but that's not who they are. I mean, heck, we used to land at night, and they'd be hiding with wearing woman clothes because we respected women and the traditional culture. They ran away into the fields, and the guys would be chasing them. I mean, the nights that we didn't kill a Taliban, it was the worst night. Like, yeah, we just arrested a bunch of guys. Well, that's good. Well, nah, we didn't get to kill them because you know what I mean. So the Taliban now kind of glorified. That's not my ass. I mean, you guys are fucking running away. You've been arrested 2-3 times and released from prisons and
We've made the Taliban into like a 10 feet tall monster,
right? Now
where they're not. They're just not.
We are now the losers because we ran away or the country collapsed and the Taliban here. I mean, are you kidding me?
I know.
I mean, we were fed up with killing them on every night, and now we just.
It's a. How do I say this? The Taliban isn't indestructible. They're not. They just had a patron, Pakistan, that was willing to continue to support. And to continue to provide sanctuary and to continue to provide advisors out in the field with ammunition, right? So when the United States and the international community pulled back, and what they pulled back, the most important thing was those contract support, right? I mean, the people that were really helping the maintainers, the logisticians, all that type of stuff, that the Afghan army had just not gotten to that point yet where it could have the support elements that they needed to function. Because the focus of the majority of the effort in the advise and assist was on making trigger pullers and pilots and stuff like that, war fighters. And then they were eventually, trying to get to the logistics part. I remember the last year talking to the Afghan Air Force officers, and they're like, we don't have a lot of mechanics because if, the pay wasn't that great, or if you're a mechanic and you speak English, you don't want to stay in Afghanistan, you want to leave somewhere. So there was a lot of retention problems that they were having as well. So I just think that people don't realize, because there's I hear it every day, and I have to do my meditation breathing not to get violent with people, right? This is not assault charge Wednesday or Thursday when somebody's like, well, the Afghans didn't fight, and I'm just like, dude, I start shaking a little bit, and like there's a vein that pops up in the middle of my forehead when somebody tells me that, and I just think 70,000 Afghan soldiers died through 20 years of war. Over 3,000 the last year alone, which is more than all U.S. casualties. And I think it's a disservice to say that. And I also think that the real problem, and this is me, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, I promise. There's a question somewhere coming. My last year there, what I really thought the problem was on the Afghan side, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that there was so much bickering inside of the palace, this palace intrigue, like going back and forth, like, Mohi versus this person, or, this person versus that person. And everybody was fighting about what to do instead of like coming together. I remember Jamiat-e-Islami, which is a political party. I won't get into all the details, but they had a firefight in one of their own parties in Kabul, and like they split apart, and like they had this shootout. And I was like, please stop doing this, guys. This isn't a good look for you. You know what I'm saying? So I think that a lot of it on the Afghan government side was that division that wasn't as cohesive as it needed to be. What do you guys think?
Two things are very important. And Kate, I didn't forget your question.
That's okay.
The first thing was an Afghan problem that has occurred in election 2014, when President Karzai left the office and the election was disputed between two candidates, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ashraf Ghani. And it took John Kerry, then the Secretary of State of the US, to come in middle and then appoint President Ghani as a president and create a position of CEO, like premier of the government, and gave it to the opponent of President Ghani, which was unconstitutional, by the way, and it never existed, and it didn't make sense. What it did is it divided the government into two. So both of them had different foreign policies, different security policies, different security advisors, and different ethnic and political interests into the Afghan domain. I think we never recovered from that. So unfortunately, they call it the unity government. The unity government was a divided house, and it kind of then cracked into the provinces, into the districts. It cracked into the rest of the fabric of our society. Was actually an internal house problem on the Afghan side, which was never solved. The second problem was the Doha Agreement, which was, it's the American responsibility. The Doha Agreement was signed without consultation, consent, or even informing the Afghan government. It kind of felt horrible because our best friend, our ally, remember, with the U.S., we were not only allies, we were actually friends in the military for life, and we've been encouraged and persuaded to make friends with the Americans, and the American soldiers were persuaded and taught in schools to make friends with the Afghans. This was the U.S. doctrine developed by Stanley McChrystal. So both of us have, made great friends. We made, great friendships, and that seeing that break away and go away kind of hit us on a personal level. Politically, globally, most of our global international legitimacy came from the United States support to Afghanistan. Many nations in the world supported us because the United States was supporting us. So when the United States sit with the Taliban, it opened this door for many allied countries to break away from us. For example, Germany, the German ambassador for the region, Marcus Potzel, became a top Taliban advisor. He would come to Kabul, meet the president, meet everybody, collect information, go back to Doha, and actually tell the Taliban what's going on and give them advice. And today, the Haqqani leader publicly thanks the German envoy for Afghanistan. So some of these things, Russia started developing a good relationship with them. Iran started training thousands of the Taliban. The government of Qatar actually paid around $1 billion to the Taliban to reconstitute some of their units and bring this political cohesion among them in order to go ahead and take Afghanistan. So some of those things, there's many other examples, but I think the two big examples, if we split the responsibility 50-50 between the Americans and the Afghans, we are responsible for a divided house since the election in 2014, and the Americans are responsible for making a bad deal with the Taliban in Doha. Personally, I felt horrible when I lost some of my friends that left. And technically, of course, this was very, very, very stressful to fight without the means that you have had. You can have as many soldiers as you want, you can have as many tanks as you want, but if you don't have bullets, if you don't have fuel, if you don't have medicine for your soldiers, it's not a stick fight.
Okay, you got anything? Would you like to...
I was just reflecting on what Khosh said about how we make the Taliban out to be this 10-foot tall thing. And I think that makes it easier for the U.S. to look on it and say, well, they're unbeatable. So we don't actually, even if we were to stay here, we're just going to continue to lose because this is something that we can't really go up against. And that's not the case. But I think that that's sort of the public opinion that we have here because that's what we've been told because it makes us leaving look a little bit better. But when you listen to people like the two of you who are talking about how important those friendships were to you, even at a macro level, like Sami, I imagine that you felt a little bit abandoned when your U.S. friends left. And you're gracious and you're kind, and I'm sure that you understood it, but it also it takes a personal hit So, like looking at it even on an individual level, like for us to have left like that, it really mattered to the people who we had been trying to support. And I'm wondering, Sami, I know that you had testified before Congress, I think in November of 2023. And so at that point you had you've already left Afghanistan and you're trying to sort things out from where you were. What was that experience like for you? And like, what were you hoping to convey with your testimony?
Sami.
Can you hear us, Sami?
Congress was an important step for our organization to attend to what we.
I'm just wondering what you were hoping to convey with your testimony when you were
I can hear you now. I broke a little bit.
No problem.
Can you guys hear?
Yes, we can hear you. So she was asking just basically what the experience was like testifying before Congress, and what was the message you were trying to...
We tried to tell them what happened. We
all right, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties.
So our message from our side was try to make them understand what went wrong as a lessons learned. And the most important message for us was what lays ahead and how can we work together to prevent many more catastrophes. And
yeah. So my question is, what does lie ahead? I know that you guys are doing the Afghan United Front, so I'll give you an opportunity to kind of talk about what your goals are.
Khosh, you want to take this?
Yeah. Go ahead, Khosh. Why don't you go ahead and answer it?
Yeah, so basically, as you know, for the first couple of years, Sami laid out how Germany, Qatar, UAE, United States, Britain, everybody thought the Taliban had changed, and the Taliban are also should be part of the solution for Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Because of the Republic's shortfalls and the Afghan Republic's issues that Will highlighted, the nation wanted to give a chance to the Taliban to see how changed they are. Are they really doing what they're saying? And clearly that disappointed everybody. Mm-hmm. And the region, number one, the world, the US, and everybody thought, all the investment and the sacrifice and blood and treasure that was spent in Afghanistan, and now we get this. We go back to the Taliban, back to the same safe havens and terrorist networks that are existing there. And then that's from the world's side of view. But from our side, Sami and myself and many others who we still feel that, this is our home, and this was, we have a responsibility for those people, because it was from, we were from the society, and we were the ones selected and promoted and kind of, entrusted to do something. So let's start an initiative from the beginning. And we decided that Washington is important, because this is not only the biggest diaspora is here, but also the U.S. has been our greatest strategic ally for the past 2 decades, and before that as well. So we think that our cause will be appreciated and supported here in Washington, which luckily, I know there's a political season here in the U.S. Nobody's sure what's going to happen, but we have a lot of friends in Congress and in private sector and former military friends, people like Will who have served in Afghanistan and have part of their hearts connected to that part of the region. So there's a lot of sympathy for us there. And for us, we also decided that, look, we need to be different to what the previous partners for the U.S. were. The Republic, which had a lot of issues, and I can talk about that all day, all night, of how bad it was. I'm also been criticized for being too critical of the Republic. But we want to be different. What's the difference is unity. It's the ability to attract those who are truly devoted and dedicated for the cause and the mission, but also be professional. We want to have the smart and professional guys. There were a lot of Afghan new generation political leaders, civil society, business leaders, military, who had been just good, better than others.
Sure.
But we want to attract the best to our group and potentially start with a political process here, as well as putting the word and let people marinate on that, especially the Afghan community, because the subsequent stages are going to be, we will have to get our hands dirty. We have to get back, because the Taliban clearly don't understand any other words other than fighting. So those steps we could, there's, where Sami is right now and what he's doing is, these are the steps we want to do. We want to set the foundation right. So we want to be recognized. We don't want to be seen as insurgents or terrorists. We want to have that covered, and subsequently, next step, move forward, get closer to the front line, bring the troops and so on. And the third is to start operations. There is still a worry that, Sami and I always talk about, is the day two. We still believe it's not going to be that hard to topple the Taliban. And some people think, well, no, the Taliban, they left literally in one night. People say the Afghan Republic collapsed in 11 days. Well, there's various things before that, but
yes, exactly.
The Taliban left in 24 hours. I was in Kabul when they collapsed. Of course, there's a lot of airstrikes. The Americans hadn't even landed. Yeah, some areas they had been, but they left. They all went to Pakistan. So it's not going to be a surprise when the Taliban are going to collapse. And
I always say that, it's easy to be an insurgent and it's harder to be the governing power, right? And you have a constituency then now you have to, pay dividends to. And the Taliban, right, is made up of, as you guys know, made up of many different factions that are, fighting amongst each other, Mullah Yaqub, Sirajin Haqqani, Hebedullah Akhundzada, all those guys. So my last question and our last question, why should an average American who doesn't really, follow Afghanistan, knows the withdrawal a couple of years ago, that was bad. I wish that wouldn't have happened. But why should they care about what goes on in Afghanistan? What is the reason for the average American to pay attention to what's going on there?
So you have the potential terrorist attacks in the U.S. Maybe scale of 9/11, maybe not, but that's one aspect, that the U.S. have also grown the capabilities so much that they could do airstrikes. This over the horizon thing is obviously debatable of how you could mitigate that. But number two, in the future, and as we all know, the American adversary, China, Russia, Iran, and Pakistan seem to keep saying that we're friends, but everything they do has been anti-American policies. So that region is not really hospitable and friend to the U.S. So you've got that area, which Afghanistan is right in the middle of it, and U.S. had blood and treasure spilled there, and you could have, with minimum troops and oversight and support, you could have kept that. So, but it was handed to the Taliban and what it is there now. So you've got that geopolitical. And the thirdly is it's the memories of over 1 million American service members that you've actually built it. You've actually created that environment, and also obviously the security forces, and to let it collapse it's heartbreaking. But it's not the end of the story. It's
exactly.
The force is still. This Eid is coming up in the next 4 or 5 days, and it's not really. I can't really talk about it enough. But all the Afghan community and some of our friends, we have been supporting. We're putting whatever we had and sending it to the guys who are left behind, who are in the neighboring countries, to make sure that the guys are taken care of, because we're going to be back. We're going to have to get you guys back out somewhere to train, and then we have to go back. And also, this is something else which we really didn't focus on, is Americans always were involved in fighting in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, little attention was paid to how much minerals and resources and money is in Afghanistan, which is being looted by the Taliban and the Chinese companies. Look, we've got the second largest lithium rare earth mine in there. We have gold mines. We have there's so much money in Afghanistan in the ground. And American companies should have been attracted to and invited there, where we were joined by the hip with the U.S., but we didn't, because we were constantly involved in fighting. We can criticize fighting as well. I really disagree with putting in a lot of troops in there, because the more troops you have kind of patrolling around the cities, the more vulnerable you are. I mean, heck, what were they doing? You know,
No,
all you had
you're
to
right.
do is a small number of special operation troops and advisors and some air. You did not need to have these districts by district plans trying to create this, image of American wave. Anyway, those things are past, but there is still a hope there. One, geopolitically, Afghanistan's location is critical. Where it be, you've got Iran next door, you've got China, you've got Pakistan, you've got Central Asia and Russia. Number two, there's a lot of resources that China and our adversaries are taking advantage of. That should have been contracted and worked with U.S. companies, where instead of Chinese using that advantage. And third is humanitarian responsibilities and moral responsibilities. I mean, half of the population, 20 million women and girls, are not allowed to go out of the house without permission of the Taliban or go to school and so on. So that is just a moral. How dare some of these political leaders, some of these celebrities stand there on stage and talk about this? And I said, do you have any morality? And half of 20 million girls and women are not allowed to go to school. And you're proud about, oh, we did this, we did that. It's just so sickening sometimes you see but yeah.
No, man, I totally get that. I know that Kate feels the same way. Yeah, I mean, look, there's 3,200, 3,400 Afghan women in the security forces, something like that. And I was in conversations up until the last months of our stay there, where we were pushing the Afghans to have more women in the ANDSF, and then we just turned around and walked away from them. And so that is something that will forever be very difficult for me to square when I hear a lot of people talking about, we need to make sure to take care of women, which obviously we should, and all the equality. And then they turn around and then they're like, well, what happened here? This is fine. It's Kate, I'll let you take it away from there.
I just have to say that I'm a little bit surprised by the tone, and like in a very happy way. But when we picked Will for our first topic to be international cooperation, and we were going to come on and ask questions about like, how do you feel about U.S. involvement? I was prepared for you guys to be like, it was the worst thing to ever happen to us. And I'm actually hearing a lot of like, not only personal accountability, but a lot of just like empathy for what the U.S. experience was in Afghanistan. And Coach, one of the things you were talking about is how when we talk to Americans about why we should still care and that moral piece. And I feel like it's really hard for people to latch on to something that's not black and white. But when you talk about these relationships, when you can hear the respect that you guys use when you're talking to each other, or just, about how you'd still be willing to engage with that for the future, I think it matters. And I think it's an interesting tone for this particular topic. Sammy, welcome back.
Thank you. Can you guys
Sammy,
hear
you I think you're on a hot mic.
There you go.
There you go.
We were just looking for a closing message, Sammy, about anything you want to end with.
Well, I heard a little bit, I think, from points of what Kosh was saying. So our closing remark is, look, Afghanistan is not going anywhere. Terrorism is still there. They're growing. They're planning. They're coming after everybody. So we all have to deal with it today or tomorrow. The later we begin, the more disastrous it will be. So we are willing to go fight back and take our country and get rid of the terrorists. They're not welcome in our country. This is our country. We own Afghanistan. We will take ownership and we will save our nation. It will be a good idea if the Americans support us a little bit, so later we can support the Americans and their interests in our region of the world.
Awesome.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the perfect.
That's perfect.
This is why people should continue to care. Despite, I think there's a little bit of Afghanistan fatigue in the media here, but it's something that we're trying so hard to keep alive in people's minds. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here for our first episode of Shoulder to Shoulder. It was so important for us to have credible voices that people really should be listening to, and I think you guys nailed it. We're so grateful for you and for everything that you're doing for your country. For everybody else who tuned in, thank you for bearing with us as we sort of worked our way through our first podcast. And we'll see you next time.
Bye. Love you, Kate.
Love you.
You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.